Over the past few years, I heard a lot about a little movie called Threads, usually in lists that call it one of the most horrifying and disturbing movies ever made. I heard that from quite a few different places, especially around about the time that Oppenheimer came out. All this talk about how disturbing it was more than enough to sell me on it. So let's have a light spoiler look at it and see if it really is as disturbing as some people claim. Threads is a film that follows the story of different groups of people, the local authorities, and mainly a young couple who are expecting a child. All the while the tensions between the major powers bubble over, and that results as a full nuclear attack on the UK. We follow their stories from before the attack all the way to the devastating nuclear winter that follows. It uses a mixture of drama and documentary presentations, which help to blend the fiction with reality. The film was first broadcast on BBC Two on September the 23rd, 1984, which has since been called The Night the Country Didn't Sleep. It was commissioned after the BBC Director General at the time, Alistair Milne, saw the film The War Game. That film was made in 1966, but it was effectively censored from the airwaves by pressure from the British government at the time, where it wouldn't be broadcast for nearly 20 years. It still, however, had a limited theatrical release, so production of the movie is still relatively fresh ground. And speaking of fresh ground, it seems that the first and the boldest choice of this film is to set it in Sheffield. I can't tell you how refreshing it is to see a film set in Britain set outside the M25. I mean, believe it or not, there's more to Britain than just London. And Sheffield, I'd say, is quite a nice city. Like being a hub of infrastructure, especially at the time this film was made in the 80s, it was quite smoky. But since then there have been efforts to make it more of a green city, with now 61% of the city being green spaces. And with it being just down the road from me, it's nice to see it on film. Seeing one of those scenes and thinking, oh yeah, I know that place. Other films set in Sheffield include This Is England, Four Lines, and more recently a Sheffield Psychedelic, the latter of which is now available online if you want to know more.
Would you like to know more?
The young couple, Ruth and Jimmy, through their own misadventures discover that they are going to be parents. Despite being young and quite overwhelmed, they both decide to have a crack at it. The first 45 minutes is just regular life, with a lot of the scenes feeling like a social realist production, with the cast being mainly unknown actors. This feels less like a film and more real. All the actors here did a really good job at making it seem as natural as possible. The interfamily drama is broken up by news footage of some vague tensions bubbling in the Middle East between the US and Soviet Russia, and some flybys of some military aircraft. Keeping the tensions here, it's like seeing the shark before the shark attack in Jaws. You are not going to be allowed to forget the suspense. It's not exactly spoilers as to what's going to happen. After all, that's the whole premise of this piece. You shouldn't be surprised. Unless someone tuned in shortly after the start expecting a documentary about knitting or something. There's a non-zero chance that has happened to at least one person somewhere. Like what I'd give to be a fly on the wall when that poor sod saw this. But the reactions from people in the film seem to be true to life. Most people shrug when they see the news and thinking, oh, nothing I can do about it. Very British. As well as the grounded drama aspect, it's given a pseudo-documentary style. A voiceover by Paul Vaughan describes the backdrop we find ourselves in, as well as text on screen to give us some exposition, the modes of government, the surrounding infrastructure. Then the bombs drop. And what follows is the most shocking few minutes I've ever seen on film. It's like someone telling you at some point they're going to slap you in the face, so every time you think they're near, you flinch. But after a while, you get used to that feeling and you let your guard down. Then bang! They slap you. And that's what happened here. They paced it perfectly. I did let my guard down when it happened, and that made it even more impactful. We see unfettered destruction and the raw terror on everyday people. Everyone is taken aback by surprise because, let's face it, no one expects it. I mean, the threat is on everyone's subconscious, but it's the sort of thing that isn't really going to happen, right? One line in particular stuck with me during the sequence.
They've done it.
That had so many emotions behind it. Disbelief, horror, and ironically a bit of disappointment. As if his neighbour cut down a tree that fell into his garden. And the they he used is an interesting point. I'll come back to that later. There's one thing in particular I found horrifying watching this for the first time. I saw the VHS version first, so the quality was a bit lower. So during the sequence I saw what looked like a person, maybe even a kid, burning due to the nuclear blast. And that hit me. It really, really did. not shying away from the fact that kids would die in this situation. That part especially affected me. So consider my disappointment when I see the remastered version. It wasn't a kid, it was an ET toy. So basically, I later found out that the crutch for one of my more emotional responses to this film, I made up in my own head. As much as I don't want to sound out there of me saying they should have shown a kid dying, it was better when I thought that they did. As you can only have your first time once, I would recommend that you watch the VHS version of this film first. As the film continues into the aftermath of the blast, events descend even further into chaos. Makeshift hospitals, civil unrest, and the decaying bunker where council members are barely keeping everything together. Remember, this was the 80s, so if this happens now with some of these new councils not even bothering to show up to work, we'd be even more screwed. What I didn't expect from this film watching it was for it to continue until decades after the bombs had dropped. That took me back quite a bit, really hammering home the long-lasting effects. Ruth has her child and eventually grows up in the now harsh wastelands that were once Great Britain. I'm going to talk about the ending now, so if you don't want to see that and skip that, timestamp here. Ruth's daughter, Jane, gets pregnant herself, and to mirror the scenes of Ruth giving birth to her, Jane gives birth to her own child. Her and many others have been shown to speak a broken version of English, with little in the way of education and societal collapse. That makes a whole lot of sense. How can one learn if you're spending all of your time trying to survive? She gives birth to her kid. When Jane is born, she was loud and crying, very vocal. But here, the kid is silent. I took from the scene that it was stillborn, but having conversations with others, they took it to mean that the kid was affected by radiation, but it's not clear that it was dead. Still, Jane receives her baby. It's quiet, and in shock and grief and horror, she screams. And that's where it ends. No music to cap us off, just credits and the howl of the wind. A film committing to a realistic nuclear depiction, it can be difficult to pick a place to end, because it just doesn't end. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. There's no one coming to fix it afterwards. Just a slow, miserable decay of the human race. So the film had to end somewhere, but ending here was perfect. Not only did it mirror the earlier scene, but it messed with our expectations. Jane being born was a brief but small glimmer of light. For a moment, things seemed like they could get back to something like normal, but having repeated that scene, only to be presented with death, was the final nail in the coffin for humanity. The thought of a child being stillborn is horrible. I'd feel for anyone who's gone through that. So ending on that note leaves it ringing in the audience's ears long after the credits have finished. I've seen some messed up horror films, but they don't come close to this because nothing is scarier than what is real. After all, the film is based on the works of a lot of scientists. And yeah, it's all well and good, like, scaring the public to death about the threat of nuclear destruction, but what good is that if it doesn't get to the people who wield those weapons? That anxiety means nothing outside of the ballot boxes if that message doesn't get through to them. During the 80s, US President Ronald Reagan was often known for being bold and brash on the international stage, but not always for the better. Like naming a nuclear defense system Star Wars, or making a comment about bombing Russia in private, jokingly, only for that to leak out and nearly spark an international incident. During his presidency, Cold War anxiety skyrocketed. People were scared. But he did see a film called The Day After, another TV movie from the time dealing with the topic of nuclear war, and reportedly, he said it did affect him and left him greatly depressed, and later changed his mind on nuclear war, opting for a more peaceful solution. Some reports say, although I don't believe this has been confirmed, but Ronald Reagan also saw threats, which would only reinforce those feelings. Both him and Gorbachev signed the INF Treaty that helped to reduce the number of nuclear weapons on both the US's and the Soviet side, a step closer to peace. So you could say that The Day After, and by extension Threads, helped to make the world a peaceful place and pivot away from nuclear weapons. If that was the goal of these films, then it worked. The line I mentioned earlier, who's they? On first reading you could say Russia. They were the ones to drop the bombs. But I took it to mean our leaders. Our leaders were the ones to drive us into this conflict. One decided to drop the bomb first, but does it really matter who? We're all going to suffer regardless. The people of Sheffield have nothing against the people of, say, St. Petersburg. If you ignore the fear-mongering and the propaganda, we're all just regular people at the end of the day. You can guarantee the people who drop the bombs won't suffer nearly as much. There's the old saying, when elephants fight, it's the grass that gets trampled. And with the narrative focusing solely on ordinary people, no military heroes, no political leaders, the true and very real cost of nuclear war becomes apparent. It also had an effect closer to home as well, with the then leader of the Labour Party, Neil Kinnock, writing to Mick Jackson congratulating him on the film, stating that stories like this should be told time and time and time again. Then he had the audacity to drop one of the hardest lines I've heard in a while. The dangers of complacency are much greater than any risks of knowledge. So that's the sort of thing I really want on a t-shirt. It's been 40 years since those films. Like, sure, we've had Oppenheimer, but the issue with period pieces is the past is a different planet. It's already happened, and the particularly dogmatic and thick-headed politicians, and normal people in general, have already made up their mind about history, regardless of the truth. And naturally, they put themselves as the good guys. I would argue that we need a new film that shows us the raw, unadulterated horror of nuclear war, much like those films did back then. Something so visceral that it would just shake enough policymakers and to make them realise that they are also not immune to the consequences of their actions, to make them pursue peace instead of nuclear-tipped extensions of their own shortcomings. Well, that said, Threads remains as horrifying now as it did back then. Obviously, I'm not old enough to have seen Threads when it first aired, but what about you? Have you guys, has anyone watching this now seen Threads when it first aired? And if so, please let me know what your thoughts were when you did. Like, did it really shake you to the core like a lot of people, especially online, say that it did? It would be interesting to see you guys' takes, and if you have seen it in the decades since, what are your thoughts on it? I'd like to know. But either way, thank you very much for watching. Please leave your thoughts down below, and we'll see you later.